Greetings, everybody. Welcome back to another episode of The Decision Hour. I am Adam Bird, your host, and we're going on with this series of Let's Have a Conversation, and I'm excited about the topic that we're going to discuss today, and I say we because we're bringing back my partner in crime, John, who is in a foreign land, in Never Land right now, up late so we can we could record this. So John, how are you, my friend?
I am doing excellent as always. Just looking forward to diving in again today.
Hey, we got a big topic this week, and this is one that I think has really kind of pulled on both of us as we've talked offline for several weeks about this particular topic and how we were going to approach it. So why don't you share with everybody what the topic of discussion is going to be in this episode?
Yeah, so the topic is religion and politics.
Ooh.
And we're coming from the idea that, well, we're asking the question and having a conversation about why is it that we have decided that in polite society, amongst polite people, that we are not going to, that it's impolite to discuss religion and politics when that's exactly what we should be talking about because it's so important.
Well, so I'm going to jump right into the conspiracy side of this, John, because I'm an a-hole and that's what I do. I think it's because there's a control factor. I think some of that there is a control factor there. For the longest time, we didn't want to talk about religion because we didn't want to offend those that were not Judeo-Christian or Jews or what those that believe in Jesus Christ, right? So we didn't want to. We thought it was rude to talk about it. So it's offensive to talk about Jesus Christ. Then I could say it's offensive not to talk about it. So who's right, who's wrong? You be the judge. Politics. It's rude to talk about politics. Listen, in the world that we live today, with all these shitbags that are in D.C., sorry, I said it, we're not even 2.5 minutes into this, and I'm already getting up on my soapbox because this is a topic that really pisses me off. Politicians. Robin Williams once said, politicians should wear a NASCAR suit when you're running for office. I thought that was the most genius thing that anybody's said, because then you get a full understanding of why somebody is saying what they are saying. If you think for 1 second that the people in Washington, D.C. that are controlling this country, if you think that they are going, the government would never do that to its people, then you are ignorant. Period.
Yeah, delusional, maybe.
Well, that's even a better word. Let's use that one. Yeah. So this. I get so passionate about. It's not that I'm frustrated. I'm passionate about these topics because it's stuff that we need to have a conversation with. I had a conversation this morning with our sister company, HMG Beverage, with one of our roaster. Great guy, Army veteran, officer, just retired as an officer, and him and I don't see eye to eye when it comes to politics stuff. But him and I will be on the phone for hours talking about stuff, and we don't raise our voice. We listen to each other, and at the end of the conversation, hey man, when are we going to do lunch again? Like, here you got two guys that don't agree on the same political thing, having a simple conversation, which is what John and I have been trying to persuade you guys to, hey, it's okay not to agree with everybody. We don't live in a world full of, rainbows and unicorns and that crap. And that's fine. But you can respect you can disagree with somebody on their opinion, not fact. Let me be clear on that. Just because somebody says it's fact doesn't necessarily mean it's fact. It's their opinion. You can disagree with their opinion and still be friends and still respect each other and not belittle each other. It happens, folks. I promise it does.
It's out there. Yeah. It's like, as dry land exists, I've seen it.
Yeah.
Uh, yeah, you're right, and I think we've because we're not having political and religious and uncomfortable conversations in the household and in our communities um, on a regular basis. I think that I think that that is part of one of the many problems that we have in our country, which is most evident in the university system, where we've lost the skills to have a constructive a constructive debate. We've lost the ability in our larger society as a result to have these debates. They're just conversations. People become narrow-minded. They become ignorant. And, we wonder how our educational institutions have produced a generation of graduates who despise America. And this is how. We've eliminated uncomfortable discussions and critical thinking, the elimination of uncomfortable discussions, of family discussions, of community discussions about politics, about religion. It's very well correlated to me with the disappearance of compromise in politics and the rise of the radical left, um, because you've created a generation of people who believe they had the right to be protected from other points of views, and if anything challenges their point of view, and this is particularly a college campus thing, contrary points of view are to be shut down and shouted down and censored and shamed and disgraced if possible by labeling those people or those ideas as racist, homophobic, or some other hijacked, now meaningless, of course, term.
Yeah, anything that goes against the narrative that's trying to be pushed
Right.
will
So
be shut
what?
off completely.
Right. So what we're saying is we should absolutely be talking about these things
Right.
in a civilized manner.
And there's no reason not to have these conversations. And here's the other thing, and this goes with the critical thinking. I'm glad you brought that up. When you hear things that you shouldn't be talking about, those conversations, if the government or the media, mainstream media, comes at you and says you shouldn't be having these conversations, those are the exact conversations that you should be having. And if you're not awake right now, folks, whether you're listening to this podcast, in the middle of the night or in the car on the way to work or wherever it is that you're going to, if you're not seeing what's going on, well, I don't watch the news. Well, first off, congratulations on that, because it's a waste of your time. But if you're not picking up what's going on in the world today, mainly here in the United States, if you can't pick up what the mainstream media is putting down, then you're going to continue to live under the rock in which you are currently under. You have to break out, and you have to think critically and go to your neighbor and have these conversations. Hey, listen, why is it so bad to talk about politics? Let me hear, John, I want to hear your stance on this matter as far as it is from a political standpoint. And you may say, Adam, these are the facts and blah, blah, blah. Well, okay, first off, let's be clear on one thing. Not necessarily, they might be the facts that you believe, but that doesn't necessarily make them the facts. One, I can totally respect that. But if you look at why people get into arguments so much about religion and about politics, it's because they focus on the information that's being put out that ties to their belief, and we're closed-minded as a society not to listen to the other side. So Adam has a certain belief and thinks these are the facts. John is going to talk about that same topic, has his own belief to that topic, and has his own facts. Who's right and who's wrong? Well, we're both right, but we're both wrong at the same time, because we may think it's the facts because we believe, because it fits our narrative and our belief system, but that doesn't mean that mine are the facts or John's are the facts, and it doesn't mean that neither one of us are wrong for that matter. But it sits us down to have these conversations and allows us to dig deeper to find out what the real facts are.
Well, and on that sort of on that note, or to branch off from that line of questioning, I would want to bring something else up,
Yeah.
which is that part of the problem with having these conversations, and part of the reason that we get so entrenched into uh, a particular point of view, is often that we're actually ignorant of why we hold that belief. And we talked a few episodes ago about how important it was to try to understand really why it is that as an individual you hold whatever beliefs you hold. Try to understand them. That's important. And so a lot of people feel very attacked because it's very difficult for them to defend their belief system. And that doesn't mean it's wrong. It just means they're not equipped to defend it when challenged. And I want to add one more part onto that, which is a contributing factor, which is, in my mind anyway, that the TV age, the CNN age, it's high volume, low information. It's like eating a box of Cheez-Its or a bag of potato chips for a meal. A lot of volume and a lot of calories, but not a lot of nutrition.
Right.
And everything takes place in these 30-second, 1 minute sound bites. I hate using that word, but sound bites. It's a very narrow bandwidth in which all information, that's like a mesh that all information is filtered through to get to the public. And so by the time it gets to the public, it's been very distilled. It's been very compressed. And a lot of the meat and context has been taken out of it. And so even for those who spend a lot of time watching news programs and stuff, the information they get lacks a tremendous amount of depth.
Yeah, and I'm glad you bring that up. I want to add on to that. The mainstream media's job is to provoke an emotional reaction. Don't be fooled. Certainly don't take my word for it. Go look this up. This is out. It's out there. If you think that the media's job is to give you the facts, and I'm air quoting this, then you have a very big problem, because that's not their job. Their job is to give you the news. No, their job, theoretically, yes, it's to give you the news, but what's actually happening is that they're giving you their opinion on what's going on, which is immediately triggering us to think, well, these are the facts because I heard it from here. Or these influencers now because the social media is so big, well, these influencers say that this, so it must be true. I hear that stuff and I think, are you that lazy that you can't go look stuff up? Now here's the other thing is how do you tell what you can find on the internet that's factual about politics or religion? I have a book in front of me, and none of you can see it, but it's the Tinsdale version of the Life Application Study Bible. And I bought this at a bookstore. And for those of you that don't know what that is, get the hell out of your house. Because my guess is that you probably have a public library in your town or in the town over. Or you have a Books A Million or a Barnes and Noble. Go into one of those stores, I dare you, and get the hell off the internet and go read a beep book. This is, and I can't read, for the record. Like I've said this before, I'm not joking. I'm a horrible reader. So I have, if I am on my little, computer that sits in my pocket, then what it is it's my Audible account, and I'm listening to books. So I encourage you guys to do that. Now I'm going off on a tangent here, and you're getting me fired up, and I can't even hear you guys. So here's what's going to happen. Well, let me ask you, John, with politics, is it popular with politics to do the right thing, or is it more popular to do what's best for the particular party in which you are working for?
Yeah, so certainly to answer your question directly, I don't think anybody would argue with it's about party right now. It has absolutely almost no correlation with the right thing. And
So
that's
it
an
doesn't matter. It
observation.
doesn't matter whether it's the right thing or not. So
Right.
if it was like, hey, we need to pass this bill because this is the right thing to do, it's going to save lives, but it's going to cost us millions and millions of dollars to do it, and I'm not going to make a dime out of it, so I'm not going to pass it, even though it would be the right thing to do.
Yeah. I mean, that's where we're all at now. I'm not so sure we were ever that far from that. Honestly, I'm not so sure that.
Like dating this back to the founding fathers.
Yeah, I'm not so sure we were ever that far away. Now the numbers were probably a lot smaller back then, but I don't think we were ever that far away because as we learned in we talked very briefly about it anyway, that partisan politics is super old. The Federalists actually hijacked the idea of the Bill of Rights from the Anti-Federalists way back in the day, in order to get credit for having done it. I mean, dirty tricks have been getting played for as long as possible. But the difference, I really do believe that at some point, and I'm not sure when, and maybe we view, looking back through history, maybe that filter or that looking glass that lens we're viewing it through filters out a lot of this stuff because it just doesn't show up in the record very well. But it does seem like, accelerating, from about 1980s on, it just seems like politics has become a
moneymaker.
A corporate game, and very little connection to doing what is right. Very, very little connection to any sort of truth. It is absolutely a dirty, dirty business, but all the more reason for families to be having conversations. When you talk to your neighbors, even if they're not particularly savvy, on politics or whatnot, nevertheless, most people in America have a pretty solid moral a moral base. We are a pretty darn moral, good, kind, generous people. And you can have conversations with, Bob next door and just say, hey, Bob, man, what do you think about, what do you think about the infrastructure bill? Have you heard anything about that?
Yeah.
It doesn't necessarily have to be something that's super controversial and that's going to make you hate him. I had conversations when I was young about probably the most divisive subject out there, which was abortion. And I was asked point blank by a much older guy, why do you think abortion's wrong? It was a very respectful conversation. And I backed him through my thought process as to why I was unable to support abortion. And his only comment was, you know what, you were a very wise young man. And I learned a lot from just having that conversation. But you can have respectful conversations with one another. You can tackle these issues. But the big point I was getting at is, if we don't have these conversations, we become narrow-minded. We get insulated and we end up in this echo chamber of our own ideas, or at least very like ideas. And hell, within our family, we could sit down at the dinner table and there's going to be, if we get everybody together, there's going to be 7 different opinions sitting around the dinner table. And they're going to be vastly different opinions. And being able to have a respectful, and I'm not even saying that we're at all the model family or something, but there's always different, there's different opinions, different points of view, different thoughts. And I guess all I ask is I want people to understand why it is they believe what they believe, and be able to defend it. And so I don't have a whole lot of tolerance intellectually. I mean, I wouldn't hate somebody because they can't do that. It's just that intellectually, I don't have a whole lot of tolerance for someone doing the equivalent of stomping off and slamming their door as they go back into their room. We need to be able to stand there. We need to be able to stand our ground. And this is really important. We need to be able to stand our ground and defend ourselves. And it's not really any different when you're talking about ideas and ideology in terms of importance than it is physically. You have to be able to stand, you need to be dangerous enough to be able to stand your ground. You have to be mentally strong enough to be able to stand your ground and defend yourself. If we roll over, so I'm going to throw something out at you.
All right, throw it.
But if you roll over for the little things, if you roll over for the school board's, jackassery of some sort, critical race theory or whatever, if you roll over for, I don't know, maybe a mask mandate or something in your town that you don't agree with, and you think that's an invasion of your rights to live your life the way you want, then stand up and articulate. Stand up to yourself. Go to the town council meeting, stand up literally at the microphone and make an argument against whatever policy it is. But if we roll over in those little things, and I am not kidding, that's how you end up as a concentration camp guard in Nazi Germany.
Ooh.
I'm not kidding. And I know that's a strong statement and maybe slightly hyperbolic, but what happened in Nazi Germany was the population. And if anybody thinks that the German people are somehow were at the time somehow fundamentally worse than Americans or British or anybody else, you're wrong. Because it could have happened in America, it could have happened in Britain, could have happened in Norway. Well, it kind of did happen in Norway, but we're very, very similar. But people were rolling over a little bit at a time in the small things. And the next thing you knew, or the next thing they knew, they were literally concentration camp guards because they had made small compromises along the way. Now, it doesn't mean that you can't always compromise, but this gets back to our idea that we explored in an earlier podcast of absolute truth that is drawn from some idea of God. In our case, we're talking about Judeo-Christian God, where that's where you and I draw our truth from. It's where my wife and I draw our truth, but then acting on that with courage in the world. And it doesn't mean you become this iron rod that just attacks anything that doesn't agree with your concept of the truth, but that you have to stand up and defend your ideas. You have to stand up to defend yourself, because if you don't, if you roll over in these little things, you become the monster.
Wow. That's
Yeah, I know. I kind of took it from something small and innocuous to something really big, but I believe that. I think that is the
but there's well, no, I mean, there's a lot of truth behind that. I mean, it's how do you get there? I think what I want to add to what you just said, John, and thank you for saying that, is that you kind of give before you don't have anything to give, and next thing you know it, you're forced.
Well, and along the way,
yeah,
the individual wasn't able to state why they objected to.
Well, and this is where I wanted to. So you can't object to it because there's a part of that we haven't mentioned yet, and there's a fear factor in there. I think the fear side of it is what's the easiest way to control a mass group? You instill fear. Tell me how this is what we're talking about. Challenge us, please. I welcome it. Tell me we're wrong. Tell me the reason why we're not talking about politics and stuff like that you cannot convince me. You can try to, but I don't think you're going to be able to convince me that the reason why we don't talk about politics right now is because the politicians don't want us talking about it because they want to have that control.
Yeah, it makes it much easier when people don't know what it is, when they haven't wrestled with the ideas. And we essentially outsource the wrestling of difficult ideas and problems to some elite who we somehow have decided is much smarter than us, which they're not. Um, when we do that, we abdicate our responsibility, and we lose control of our own fate.
Right.
When we do that, we need to be more engaged, not less. That's one of the reasons that the founders, um, not all of them, but most of the founders would have agreed that local politics, local conversations, was the most powerful and the most important. And they wanted the power close to home. They didn't want it in far away, Washington D.C. in some, marble hall. They wanted it in the church meeting house right down the road.
You're talking about power and what the founding fathers wanted. And I can't help but to think it triggered something with me with this conversation of politics and religion. Where does that power come from if we'll use today that approximately 51%, I believe we had said in a previous show, of the population work for the government or governments, meaning the federal government or the government within the states. So where does the power come from? Because now you got two separate powers. You look at the state as a power as one, and then you have the federal, and this is still all within the politics side of things. And then you have the rest of the people. And we're supposed to listen to everybody else within those organizations. Is that my understanding? Or by all means, correct me if I'm wrong.
That's pretty well it. And I think what we had said, if I remember correctly, was that roughly 50% of the U.S. economy, or I'm sorry, GDP, is accounted for by government activities at the state and national level. Yeah. And then about 20 million people actually work in state and federal government, which is such a large, with so much power and so many individuals, it becomes able to affect election outcomes and things when acting in their own interest.
Let me ask you some political question, John. Should there be, I almost said time trials because the Olympics are on. That's not what I want to say. Should there be term limits? That's what I was trying to say. Should there be term limits?
Here's what I used to say. First, I used to say, we've got term limits right now. They're called elections. So that was my stance for years.
We have proven throughout the years that you cannot have an election or you can't use computers for an election that can be easily hackable, and we've shown that. And again, I'm not stating a fact. This is stuff that you can find on the internet, people. But if you don't think that this past election wasn't hacked, and there's been other elections that were hacked, quite frankly, this just happens to be one that they're highlighting the most. You can't have it. So it's like I see what you're saying with, yes, there's term limits, but I also am a firm believer that there should never be a career politician.
100%. And so that's what I used to say. Then I learned a little bit about a year or so ago, which I couldn't really spout a lot of this out anymore, but I learned a decent amount about how much advantage an incumbent has over a challenger. And it was staggering, the advantage in terms of monetarily, they have a huge advantage. Exposure wise, they have a humongous advantage, right? If you're already in front of the cameras, in DC every night, and if you want to get some more exposure, real easy to make a controversial statement and get in front of the cameras some more if you're running for office. So I am now of the opinion that we absolutely are going to have to do term limits. I don't know if it'll ever happen. It's kind of one of those things like the administrative state, where we know that we need to tamp it down. We know that we need to take some of the power away, but we haven't quite figured out how to do that. Now, last week, I guess it was, we made some pretty good suggestions, I thought, as to some strategies we might be able to do that. But bottom line is we haven't figured it out. term limits would be a pretty simple piece of legislation to pass to limit the. My God, Joe Biden has already spent about 50 years in D.C. He's never really done anything with his life other than be a politician. It's sickening. And then there's many others. He's not the only one. In fact, for most of his career, Joe was probably one of the better ones. He was actually a pretty honest broker for the most part. Was the reports I had received was that as a senator, the guy was actually.
That's all the time we have, folks. But no, I
I'm painting the picture that the old reports used to be, Joe Biden's he's an honest broker. He's a guy that you can deal with.
Right.
Across the aisle and stuff, very reasonable guy.
Right.
And of course, became very polarized around the time he became a vice president. But where was I going with that? Anyway, yeah, I 100% believe there should never be a career politician. Now, somebody's going to say, "Oh, but we want somebody with experience in there." No, you don't.
I agree with you. You don't.
And the reason you don't is it becomes a big game. And I think I talked a little bit about just my experience in the Pentagon, working with the budget, working with programs and stuff. Yeah, you want people who are experienced and know how to play that game and get the money and stuff, but they can also work it. They can work it to their advantage a little bit. And it becomes the military industrial complex, wagging the dog. But the same thing happens in Congress. They get really entrenched with certain companies. They get really entrenched with certain not constituencies, but certain special interests.
Yeah,
well, I guess that is a constituency,
yeah.
But they end up caucusing with certain people, and their personal beliefs get really distilled. That's the wrong word. Diluted, not distilled. Their personal beliefs and the things that they promised, and that the principles that they said they stood for when they first got there, they get really diluted through these mechanisms. And I am of 100% agreement that now we need term limits. And this is a great example of an awesome. That would be such a great conversation to have at the dinner table with your kids.
Right.
Right there.
Because you can also tie into that as like making decisions that are necessary. Having to make a decision, the right decision, or making a decision that's going to benefit you. Right.
Yeah.
And that's a great conversation to have with your kids. Are you always going to do what's right, or are you going to make a decision based on how it benefits you? And with that being said, John, if I may, since we're talking about politics and religion, and we'll start jumping into the religion side of things here in just a moment, I want to share something. I did some research in the Bible, like kind of thought, what would be, what does the Bible say? Does it say anything about politics? And it actually does. And there was a couple of passages that I found interesting. So if I could share them here for just a moment and kind of elaborate on them
Awesome.
a little bit here. But the first one is Matthew 27:19, and it reads, while he was sitting on the judge's bench, his wife sent word to him, have nothing to do with that righteous man, for today I've suffered terribly in a dream because of him, end quote. What does that mean? Let me explain. That particular passage, for a leader who was supposed to administer justice, Pilate proved to be more concerned about his political stance than about doing what was right. He had several opportunities to make the right decision. His conscience told him Jesus was innocent. Roman law said an innocent man should not be put to death. And his wife had a nightmare that caused her to encourage her husband to let Jesus go. Now, for those of you that non-believers or whatnot, this is when Jesus was in front of the Roman Pontius Pilate, and he was getting sentenced because the Jews did not agree with Jesus being a savior. So Pilate had no good excuse to condemn Jesus, but he was afraid of the crowd. So we're talking thousands of years ago of a decision where politics came into play on a man's life, where the guy who was in charge knew the man was innocent, but sent him to the wolves anyway because of a political stance, right?
Yeah, he was afraid of an uprising.
Right. That's exactly it. The next one I want to read is John 18:30. And that says, they answered him, "If this man weren't a criminal, we wouldn't have handed him over to you." And what does that mean? It kind of plays into what my last one was with Matthew. But this one states Pilate knew what was going on. He knew that the religious leaders hated Jesus, and he did not want to act as their executioner. They could not sentence him to death themselves. Permission had to come from a Roman leader. But Pilate initially refused to sentence Jesus without significant evidence. Jesus' life became a pawn in a political power struggle.
Yeah. So, of course, Rome had taken over Palestine at the time, or that area, Israel. I'm not even sure what they called themselves at the time. Anyway,
Israelites.
Yeah, the Romans ruled over the Israelites, and so one of the things that was a hallmark of Rome is they would allow local cultures and local politics to remain in power as long as they could pretend like they were in charge, as long as they didn't try to really, really be in charge.
Right.
The Romans were over it. So they even had King Herod. I know it's probably a little confusing to a lot of people, but they even had King Herod, who was a Roman puppet, who was over the Jews, right? He was king of the Jews.
Mm-hmm.
But Pontius Pilate was the, what do they call it? It's like a governor. That's not the right word, though. At any rate, he was in charge of that region, and he did not want, he absolutely did not want an uprising on his hands. Imagine being a Roman. It's kind of like being, it's kind of like being a United States soldier in Afghanistan. You don't want all the people to rise up and come get you, because you don't have enough firepower or muscle power, I guess, back in those days, to fight that off. You've got to manage the situation. And yeah, it's interesting that they said he became a pawn in a political game, because we usually, those of us who are Christians and who have read about this since we were, oftentimes little kids, that story, you don't ever get that piece. What we hear about and learn about is the spiritual side, how, Jesus was he was tortured and executed as a martyr to save, to be the sacrifice, to atone for the sins of all of mankind, right? And we kind of only hear that piece. You don't hear the historical piece. It sounds like they drew on a lot of Roman and contemporary secular
and the politics. And I really, those resonated with me, because if you've done any type of study of the Roman Catholic Church or the just Christianity as a whole, doesn't matter what religion. I look at religion like this. You have whether it's organized religion, if you believe in God, and then you have all these different, Baptist, Lutheran, Catholic, et cetera, same company, just different departments, right? That was the best. That's how I look at it. And regardless of which department you are in, was based off of your belief system. But if you look back in that time frame where the Roman Catholic Church was kind of at the time was the there was a lot of politics that were in play, and you see it in old movies portrayed by the Roman Catholic Church. This is going to sound funny. It's not my intent, but like even Robin Hood was a prime example of how the Roman Catholic Church used politics to pursue certain things to get money to the church and whatnot.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah,
I tell you what,
the Da Vinci Code was, it was another
the Roman
series of
Catholic
movies.
Church, it is a fascinating history if you learn about it. It is absolutely.
I would love to be a fly on the wall in the archives in the Vatican City.
Oh, it's
just for a day. For a day.
How they, and I just mean they, whoever was in power, over the ages, whoever was making decisions and making power plays, how they were able to combine religion with politics. So no kings were essentially subject to the Pope.
Mm-hmm.
And they would have a bishop or a cardinal or whatever. They would have a high-ranking church official in their court. This is before the Protestant Reformation. And they didn't make a lot of decisions without consulting.
Right.
And so the amount of power that the church had, if you'll remember, one of the reasons that King Henry the eighth. No, wait, no, not the fifth. Yeah, Henry the eighth, Queen Elizabeth's father, the one who had all his wives killed. One of the reasons he started the Church of England was to get out from under the political pressure of the Roman Catholic Church. So he wanted to divorce his wife for whatever reason. Of course, he had like 5 of them or something. And he wanted to divorce her, and the Catholic Church wouldn't let him. And he's like, I'm going to start my own church. You guys are out of here. And it was a big upheaval, almost like a Brexit kind of a thing going on. Right. Yeah. But he started his own church, divorced his wife, and then I had a couple of them beheaded or something. It was a crazy time. But the amount of political, it's interesting that you brought that up, because I hadn't even thought about it when I was preparing some notes for the show about how ancient the intertwining of politics and religion is.
And the power.
My God.
The power behind. So here's why I think this is important, is we're talking politics and religion. And this goes back to what I said earlier in the show, John, is that they, as in the higher ups that are in charge of the countries, they don't want us they don't want the everyday person talking about politics and religion, because we might start thinking critically. We might start seeing the bigger picture. We might start seeing things that don't make sense. We might start putting the puzzle pieces together, and then we realize, hey, wait a minute. You guys are telling us one thing, but so it's a do as I say, not as I do? Is that how this boils down to?
So think about this. All right, just let's and it'll take some emotion and whatnot out of it if you look at it in history. So take a look at what happened to people like Galileo. Take a look at what the reaction was when things like the Gutenberg press was made. Gutenberg press was one of the largest leaps forward in technology in the world. Guess who wasn't really that keen on it? The church. The church has a great political power, right? Why would that be? Because they didn't want the Bible written in the people's common language, because then they lost the monopoly on
interpretation,
on dogma. It became much more difficult to convince people that they needed to pay something like indulgences in order to get their family member out of purgatory. It became much more difficult when people could read for themselves, what was said in the Bible. So the Bible, the church was not real keen on it. When I believe it was Galileo who discovered that the planets rotate around the sun, and that was a worldview changing thing,
Mm.
and he was declared a heretic because the church was losing power to his scientific discovery. So it's very simple. It's very similar to our political game today, that the political elite is very much like the church was, early, I'll say up till about 1600 BC. I guess you could kind of say I'm sorry, AD. I guess you could say until the Enlightenment kind of kicked off, or at least the Reformation. I'm not the Reformation. Florence, Italy. the ah the when Michelangelo and everybody was starting to do art and all kinds of stuff.
Renaissance.
The Renaissance. I completely brain farted that word, but it's very similar. It's our political elite are in a very similar position to what the church was
right
prior to the Reformation, prior to when the Renaissance kicked off, and we really started having this great, just almost like a huge springtime and growing season of ideas. Our political elite is in a similar situation, and they want to make sure that the population gets the information that they want, hopefully through CNN or MSNBC or a Facebook article, something that's been washed and filtered so that we're getting the information they want us to have. One of the biggest problems for our political elite and for our media now is the rise of podcasts and YouTube channels. And so you can follow that, and you can see that, well, now YouTube is now getting politicized, having a lot of pressure, political pressure brought on them to begin censoring. Facebook, same thing. Twitter, same thing. We all know this story, how it's played out. But you can't stop it because it's so relatively easy to pop up another platform that's getting information out, like this podcast, where we're just having an honest conversation. I'm sure that for some reason they could ban us on Facebook or something. But, this is going out on the HMG website. This is going out via, several other mechanisms to be distributed to people. And I know that we are very, very sincere, trying to do the best we can to get honest, unadulterated truth out there, and to encourage people in a positive way to take positive, brave, courageous action in the world based in truth. So that's what we're doing. At any rate, that was a really long answer to a question. Wow.
It was a great answer. Politics and religion is something that we all need to sit down and not be afraid to have a conversation with. We need to get with our families during the dinner table, and if you think it's rude to have this conversation at dinner, make time at a minimum. Make time for family time to sit around the coffee table, or on the couch, and just have turn the TV off for an hour and just have these conversations. We're not going to move forward in the right direction if we don't start having these conversations. We learn from having these conversations, and they are difficult to have. You're not going to agree with everybody. You're going to look at your loved ones and you're going to raise an eyebrow like, I can't believe I'm related to that moron. It happens to me a lot. But you have these conversations and you learn so much from it. I promise you guys, if you guys just open up, and here's the thing. Well, I don't know much about religion. Well, listen, I got something for you. I said earlier, there's these places called bookstores. They used to be really popular back in the day. And for those of you that are lazy asses and you can't get off your ass or off the couch and out the door because you're afraid of pick something that's in the air right now, whatever. then you all have these computers that fit in your pockets that cost so much money and that, quite frankly, are ridiculous. But that's beside the point. There's what they call apps, okay, and there's an Audible app, and they have apps for the Bible. Find one that works for you. And if you're not familiar with the Bible, I would recommend doing a life application study Bible, because you can read a passage and then it tells you what that passage was meant, and then it kind of and believe me, this is the number one selling book of all of human history, and it still sells more books than any other book to date.
It's interesting you say that. But this is not, this was not conceived to be any sort of a certainly not a Bible sales.
Yeah, I'm not going door to door selling Bibles
right.
or encyclopedias.
And it wasn't conceived to be anything that necessarily was focused on Christianity or religion of any kind, but it is. I think we keep coming back to it because it's so central to the founding of our country, and it's so central to our society. It's kind of hard to get away from it.
Right.
And I do not. You made a really good point, though. There would be an objection. Someone would say, "Well, I really don't know that much about religion of any kind. Probably not even their own." And everybody's got a religion. Maybe we can have a whole conversation about that, because I've said it before. Some of the most religious people I've ever met were atheists. But I just it's hard to get away from, because it runs through everything we do, because it's where we draw our truth and our belief system and our sense of morality from. And so, it's hard to get away from. So we might as well get comfortable talking about it. And it doesn't, it's going to be a little uncomfortable, but we've got to learn how to think critically. We've got to learn how to have difficult conversations and debate without hating each other. We've got to learn how to not stomp away, like a teenage daughter and slam the door and, throw yourself on the bed and bury your head in your pillow and cry because you're upset. You have to stand, you have to learn why it is you believe what you believe, stand your ground, defend yourself. And sometimes you're going to find out that you're wrong.
Ooh.
And that you should be so thankful. You should be so thankful for those moments.
Yep.
When you find out and you measure it against truth, and you wrestle with it, and you find out that your previous belief was wrong. And I don't claim to be a biblical scholar at all. I have friends, many actual friends, who are biblical scholars, and they would bury me. And in a heartbeat in one of these discussions. I often consult with them. Actually, before we were talking about our concept of absolute truth, I consulted with a good friend of mine, Charlie Colbert, who's an Anglican pastor down in South Carolina. A brilliant man who I went to college with, and I've known him for since 1985 or something. I've known this guy. He's a biblical scholar, has written books. I am not. We're just trying to.
Well, we're pointing out where it goes back to the basics, right? The founding principles, which was our first episode in this series of Let's Have a Conversation.
You don't have to be a scholar to have a conversation.
Exactly.
Right.
That's perfect. Exactly. Well said.
That's what I was trying to get to, and I couldn't.
No, that's and here's the other thing. I will say this, and then we'll wrap this up. I will say, read. Don't believe everything you read. Think critically and ask questions. That's really it. Don't be afraid to have conversations or ask questions about politics or about religion. Period. With that being said, John, I appreciate you being on here. each and every week as we discuss these hard topics. But it's not the only thing that you do is talk. You also, why don't you tell a little bit the listeners a little bit more about yourself? You have a company. I want to let's pitch that.
We absolutely do have a company. Stacy and I started a company a couple years ago named Semper Savage. It is a marinade and salad dressing company, marinade and dressing company, because the dressings can be used for just about anything. They rock. We got 4 varieties. It's the best stuff on the planet. We put it on everything, and we have got 4 varieties. We've got Savage Balsamic, Savage Caesar, Savage Cider, apple cider vinaigrette, and Savage Centurion, which is a red wine vinaigrette. Go to sempersavage.com and get you some.
They truly are the best marinades and salad dressings my taste buds have ever had. That's all we have in our house right now. So go check them out, sempersavage.com. Also, got to give a shout out to our parent company, Heroes Media Group. Go over there, check out all the shows. If you want to be a contributor or start a podcast or write a book or an audio book or whatnot, if there's anything that Heroes Media Group can help you out with, simply go to www.heroesmediagroup.com. Until next time, you've been listening to The Decision Hour.